Alrighty, so we'll go ahead and get started. Everybody's here and our webcast is ready to go. So first of all, thank you everybody for coming. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Lisa Moore. I am the Chief of the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau. I have Dave Edwards here, the Bureau's Supervising Auditor, and Cheryl Jenkins, the Bureau's Program Operations Supervisor. And they'll be talking about several of the items on the agenda a little bit later. To my right is Jason Hurtado. He is our assigned legal counsel. And also with the Bureau, I have Carolina Salmons. She's our legislative analyst. And finally, I do have some staff from the Department of Consumer Affairs in attendance, so if I could have them introduce themselves at this time.
Hi, I'm Karen Nelson, Assistant Deputy Director with the Department of Consumer Affairs Board and Bureau Services. Happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Rose Turner. I'm with the department's Division of Legislative Affairs. I work with the Secretary of the Board. Happy to be here too.
Thank you. So we have a new advisory committee. We have 4 professional members and 3 public members. This committee was appointed February 1st of 2018 and will be in place through January 31st of 2020. At this time, I'd like to have all of you introduce yourselves and provide some information about who you are and what you do. So Chris, we'll start with you.
Sure. So my name is Chris Donhost, and I am the Funeral Home Liaison with Sierra Donor Services. I represent or sit on this committee as one of the funeral professionals, as I am licensed as a funeral director, embalmer, cemetery manager, and crematory manager.
My name is Nicole Montague. I'm presently a funeral director for South Los Angeles Mortuary. I also manage South Los Angeles Cremation Services. I'm a pre-need insurance agent, funeral and burial only. And that's about it.
My name is Nicholas Marnelli. I'm the general manager of the Italian Cemetery in Colma, which is one of only 17 cemeteries in a 2 square mile area. This is my 3rd cemetery I've managed in Colma. It's my 7th cemetery I've managed in my career. And I feel like I'm just getting started.
Morning, everybody. My name is Pat Collins. I'm a Deputy District Attorney in the Consumer Protection Unit at the Napa County DA's office.
I'm Jean Okui, and I am the president of the Funeral Consumers Alliance of California, and very active in our local affiliate in Merced, Stanislaus counties.
Hi, I'm Jeannie Clark, and I am the cemetery manager, crematory, and funeral director at Ivy Lawn Memorial Park in Ventura, California, which is a historic district nonprofit cemetery. I'm very excited to be here and meet you all today.
Great, thank you very much. There is one member, a public member, who's not here today, Maria Mangini. She has an excused absence, but she will be participating in future meetings. She also served on our prior advisory committee for the last, from 2015 through 2017, and she was somebody that was reappointed. So I anticipate that she will be here for future meetings. Again, thank you all for your volunteer service. I know that you have all done this on your own time, at your own expense. We didn't, in spite of our efforts to really solicit for committee members, we didn't get a whole lot of people interested or a lot of applications, so I thank you for your time and commitment to this committee. So the Bureau is not statutorily mandated to have this committee, but it provides a forum for both consumers and licensees to provide input on funeral and cemetery related issues, and allows the Bureau to meet its regulatory obligations in an open and transparent environment. Those things allow us to do our jobs better and have a more effective Bureau. So this meeting is being webcast or recorded?
Recorded.
It's being recorded. We had a little technical issue this morning, so it's going to be recorded. It will eventually be posted to YouTube, so it's available after the meeting for people to look at. Normally it's webcast so people can observe online in real time. We just had a technical problem this morning, so anybody who wants to look at it later, it will be available. We anticipate webcasting all of our meetings if appropriate to do so, and as long as we have the facilities and equipment to do so. But for the record, this meeting is being webcast or recorded from 1625 North Market Boulevard, Sacramento, California, in the El Dorado room. And if there's one thing you will hear me say again and again is that this is a working committee. And your participation and discussion of agenda items is appreciated. We want to hear your input, and we want you all are here for, we're selected for reasons, your education, your expertise, your knowledge of the industry, your knowledge of consumer issues, so please do not hesitate to speak up. Additionally, if you have items or issues or questions that you think might be appropriate for a future agenda, feel free to email me or call me and let me know, and we'll consider it for future agenda. So just a couple quick housekeeping items. That restrooms are located in the lobby. There's a cafe on the first floor if anybody needs or wants anything in the next 2 hours. And at this time, I would appreciate it if you would put your cell phones, tablets, or any other electronic devices on silent for the duration of this meeting. Okay, so that concludes item number 1. We're going to move on to item number 2 on our agenda, the responsibilities of new advisory committee members. So committee members, I have provided all of you with a member orientation and reference manual for advisory committee members. I sent it to you prior to this meeting. You'll also find a copy of it in your folders. Also in your folders, there's copies of the Bureau's publications, including our strategic plan as well as the department's strategic plan. I'd like to spend a few minutes going over the manual and answering any questions you might have. So the first 2 pages of the manual include the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Bureau's mission, vision, and values, which are part of the strategic plans. So I would encourage you to review both of those documents and periodically review the manual so you're aware of your role and the Bureau's expectations. So the focus of this committee is to devise the Bureau on applicable agenda items based on your knowledge and the experience and education each of you bring to the table. The expectation is that you will provide professional and technical input concerning the Bureau's regulatory, licensing, and enforcement functions. The committee does not have any voting privileges. The ultimate decision is made by the Bureau Chief under the Director's oversight. The Bureau does not independently devise legislative proposals or take positions on bills, so this committee won't be addressing legislation in that regard. Most legislation this committee will discuss will focus on chaptered legislation and pending legislation that the Bureau is monitoring. You will serve for a 2-year term through January 2020, and I can reappoint you for an additional 2-year term if necessary and appropriate, but none of you may serve for more than 2 consecutive terms. I find it helpful to have some carryover from one committee to the next, as it helps ensure the knowledge and continuity of issues that are being addressed. We typically hold 2 meetings a year in May and November. That is subject to change depending on everybody's availability or the particular agenda items that we may or may not have for the agenda. And there may be occasions where the Bureau asks one or more members to work on a special task or item based on their area of expertise and what we're trying to accomplish. We ask that you make every effort to attend these meetings. Members who miss 2 consecutive meetings may be removed and another member appointed for the remainder of the term. Because we are still prohibited from any non-discretionary travel, you are serving as a volunteer and we cannot compensate you for attending the meeting. But again, I want you to know how much we appreciate your time and effort to be here. And the last page in the manual talks about committee member expectations. I would ask that you become familiar with these guidelines so we can have productive and efficient meetings. So that's what I have under agenda item 2. Do the committee members have any questions on any of that? Any comments from the public on this particular agenda item? Okay, we'll move on to number 3. So I've asked my management team to give you an overview of their responsibilities in their respective units and to share information about some current activities within their units. My current management team consists of Dave Edwards as my supervising auditor, Cheryl Jenkins as my program operations supervisor, and Sandy Patterson, who is our field operations supervisor. She is not here today because she is in fact meeting with our field staff, and I'll talk a little bit about that after Dave and Cheryl talk about their programs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and you can talk about what's going on in the audit unit.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Edwards. As my son says here, I'm the supervising auditor with the Bureau. The audit unit has 5 staff. It's myself, 4 auditors. 3 of those auditors are journey level. 1 is kind of entry level auditor, and then we have 1 retired annuitant who's a journey level auditor. She came back basically half-time. So it's a pretty small audit unit considering the tasks that we need to do. We license, as you probably know, we license 191 endowment care cemeteries. Endowment care cemeteries essentially are required under the Health and Safety Code to place a certain amount, a deposit, a certain amount to an endowment care trust fund for every interment space that they sell. And essentially the purpose of the endowment care trust fund is to develop over time through investment to earn enough income to take care of the cemetery once it's essentially economically no longer a viable entity. In other words, once it's sold out, once it's sold all of its interment spaces, and its revenue, its business revenue has dropped, then the endowment care fund essentially is there to earn income to pay for cemetery maintenance in the long run. So for those cemeteries, they're required to submit an annual report to us. That annual report includes financial statements that are audited by a CPA. And so one of our functions is to review those reports, review all the numbers, and make sure that they're complying with the requirements in the Business and Professions Code and the Health and Safety Code with regards to their allocations and their use of endowment care funds. We also license about 200 crematories. So the cemeteries that we license and the crematories that we license also submit quarterly reports, and that's on the number of interments that they've done by quarter. So the audit unit also processes those. And we also license a little more than 1,000 funeral establishments, and each of those is responsible for reporting on their pre-need trust funds. Now, pre-need trust funds are those funds where a customer pre-arranges for funeral goods and services and enters into a contract for those goods and services before they're needed, but goes ahead and pays for those in advance. And when they pay for those in advance under California state law, the funeral establishment is required to place those into a trust, and there's a lot of requirements on how those are essentially managed. So we do receive annual reports from the funeral establishments as well regarding their management of the pre-need trust funds. In addition to the reports, we also receive audited financial statements that we review. So it's very similar, our activities on those are very similar to what we do with the cemetery annual reports. And basically, we're looking at those to make sure that they're allocating and managing funds correctly. So that's a large function of what the staff in the audit unit do. We also do site visits. So when we see through a desk review or when we're alerted through an investigation perhaps by field representatives or other sources that there's some sort of indiscretion going on, right, having to do with endowment care or special care or pre-need funds, then we will schedule a site visit and we'll actually go out for a week or so and review all the books and the financial records and do a full-scale audit. So those are the primary functions of the audit unit. So I know I said a lot, and I probably said it fast. So does anybody have any questions about kind of those functions?
5 people do all of that?
Yes. Yeah. So when people say state workers may not work very hard, at this bureau we work hard. Yeah, we have a lot to do. This is just the small audit unit. This isn't what all of these other folks do. There's a lot that's done right at the bureau.
Dave, sorry, one question.
Yeah.
If you find problems after the full-scale audit, have you referred cases in the past to the AG or DAs for enforcement?
We have.
Okay.
Yes.
About how many?
It would depend, per year, maybe a couple per year. I mean, so we will refer over to the AG's office if there's something that is large enough, right, that it can't be resolved, essentially working with the funeral establishment or with the cemetery. We also, if they don't report we try our best to notify them of the requirements for reporting, but if we don't ultimately receive the report through a progressive disciplinary process, we have also referred to the AG's office for those.
Do you know if those provisions have criminal punishments or civil or both?
They can have either. So in the past, there have been criminal charges for embezzlement, right, of endowment care funds. So it would really depend on the Bureau's discretion and working with the AG's office and legal counsel here at the Department of Consumer Affairs, what sort of actions to take. But it can range.
You dropped a little phrase in there that some may not be special care. Can you explain what that is and how it differs from endowment care?
So I dropped that in there on purpose because I had missed it. So thank you for catching that. Special care funds, essentially what I described for funeral establishments where a customer pre-arranges funeral goods and services and prepays for those. On the funeral side, under our laws, that's called pre-need contracts. On the cemetery side, they're also called pre-need contracts, but the fund, the trust fund that cemeteries are required to deposit those funds to, is called a special care trust fund. So essentially it's the same thing as the funeral pre-need trust fund, but it's for cemeteries. Thank you for asking. Okay. The next, so if we're ready to move on, because I'm certainly don't want to take all the time here. So one of the things that the audit unit also did, under AB 180, we were required to evaluate the sufficiency of endowment care, basically statewide. It was a legislative requirement. And so the audit unit did survey and receive responses from every cemetery, right, which is pretty impressive. That everybody participated in responding. We were able to collect a lot of very good data based on the annual reports that we have and the financial records and the information that the cemeteries provided us. So the audit unit did draft and work with the industry and the Bureau and the Department of Consumer Affairs, right, to draft and create a report for that. That's actually on our website if you have an interest in learning a little bit more about the function of endowment care and kind of the background and how long it's been required and kind of the current status statewide, right, on cemeteries and endowment care funds. That's on our website.
And that went over to the policy committees of the legislature on December 29th of 2017. So we are awaiting any feedback or any questions that might come out of that report that we did. But as Dave said, it's posted to our website, and I think it's about 19 or 20 pages, and some of those are attachments, but it gives a very good history, like Dave said, of the endowment care fund and what California looks like as a whole. So if you are so inclined to take a look at that and read it, you might find it very interesting. So a lot of hard work went into that with a lot of people and a lot of volunteers from the cemetery industry who sat on a focus group to help us compile that information. So we're very proud of that report and very grateful for the help that we received from industry.
Absolutely. So that was the last, I think. Was there
For
one?
you.
Oh, I think we covered this.
Talk about due dates?
Legislation. Which legislation?
So the endowment care fund and special care trust fund reports are due to us on June 1, 2000, every year, June 1 of 2018 in this case. So we're going to be receiving those pretty quickly. The funeral pre-need trust fund reports, we receive those on May 1st. So usually in May and June, we are just, we've got lots of reports that we're trying to do intake on and process. And then we kind of digest those, so to speak, over the following months. So is that kind of what you?
Yeah, I just wanted them to be aware of due dates. So on the funeral side, May 1st is come and gone. So if you haven't done something that you need to do, you're technically late and you should do it now. Keep in mind June 1st is just around the corner. So
if you want the citations on where those requirements are, The funeral pre-need trust fund reports are required by California Code of Regulations 1269. And the annual endowment care and special care trust fund reports are Business and Professions Code 7612.6. And if any of you have questions about those forms, about access to those forms, about completing them, or financial statements, you can always call. And I think that's my time.
Okay, any more questions for Dave? All right, Cheryl?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Jenkins. I am the Program Operations Supervisor, and I oversee the Bureau's administrative, enforcement, licensing, and examination development functions. I have 8 staff that report to me to take care of all of those functions for the Bureau. I have 2 that fall under my administration. I have Carolina Salmons, who is my legislative analyst, the position that I formerly held with the Bureau. I have Richard, who is our go-to for anything that is personnel, technologically related, and a lot of other miscellaneous duties as assigned. For licensing, I have 2 staff members that handle the licensing for the entire state of California. I have 1 that's assigned to all of the business licenses and the maintenance applications that go along with that. And then I have 1 that handles all of the personal licenses. For my enforcement, I have 4 staff, and I have 1 update on that. Many of you know Ellis Carr, who was with the Bureau for over 20 years, I think.
Yeah.
Quite a long time. He retired back in October, and he's enjoying being retired and getting to have a lot of free time. So I have recently filled his previous position. I have Monica Tagas. She is going to be taking care of any of the Bureau's enforcement actions that go to a disciplinary level, and she will act as our liaison with the Attorney General's office for the Bureau. Carolina was previously an enforcement analyst, and as she promoted, I had to fill her position as well. And we have Louis Massey, who recently joined us in April. And he and another analyst, Adrian, are our, we call desk analysts. They handle any of the complaints that come into the Bureau that do not require an actual field representative to go out and do an investigation. So they're the lower level complaints that are handled in-house. And they also review all of the inspection reports that are done by the field representatives. And last, I have Allison, who is our site and fine. So if any of the inspections or the investigations that are completed at the Bureau require a citation to be issued, they go over to her desk. And that actually puts me fully staffed at the moment, so that's a really great feeling. We kind of have had some retirements and some promotions, and so there's been some staff movement, but it's nice to have everybody fully staffed so we can continue to do what we do. Any questions about my area's job functions or staffing updates? Meryl?
I don't know if that's under your jurisdiction, but I understand there's 2 new inspectors now.
I will talk about that when Cheryl's through.
Okay.
Yep.
That's actually under our field
Exciting.
operations supervisor. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to move on to examination development. This is a ongoing area for the Bureau. We're continuously working on one exam or another. We have 5 examinations that we administer. Our funeral director, embalmer, crematory manager, cemetery manager, and cemetery broker exams. We are required to conduct an occupational analysis every 5 to 7 years for each of these exams. And an occupational analysis defines a profession in terms of the actual tasks that the licensee must be able to perform safely and competently at the time they are licensed. And this is required in order to develop a fair, job-related, and legally defensible examination. And it must be based on what the licensee actually does on the job. So we're currently working on our crematory manager exam, and this did require us to complete an occupational analysis. We have completed that, and we've held workshops that we needed to for that. And we are currently working on completing the exam development portion that comes from the occupational analysis. I currently have 2 more workshops required to complete that before we will have that exam finished and ready to put out. Those 2 workshop dates are going to be June 12th to 14th. That will be a 3-day workshop. I could actually use 1 or 2 more people, so if there are any crematory managers that would be willing to participate, that would be awesome. And then I have a workshop coming up on July 31st, August 1st, a 2-day workshop, and I have nobody for that workshop at this time. For us to hold a workshop, we need to have a minimum of 4 licensed crematory managers, but 6 would be preferable. So if anybody knows of a crematory manager they can offer up to us to come to Sacramento, that would be wonderful. Absolutely.
I do want to, as Cheryl said, examination development is ongoing, and we've talked about it, and we talk about it anytime we go to speaking engagement or talk to industry, how critical it is to get participation. Usually it takes a full fiscal year for us to get through our examination development, or, in this case, we had an occupational analysis and then the follow-up examination development workshops to write the questions and organize it. This one, because we've had to postpone workshops 2 or 3 times, is falling into the next fiscal year because we can't get people to participate. So we do recruit, we ask, sometimes we beg for those people to participate. And the 2 exams, crematory managers, there's not a large licensing population. I think there's less than 600, and Cheryl will tell you shortly that what working on this next fiscal year, cemetery managers, and that's an even smaller licensing population. We cannot hold these workshops without licensees to help us work through those exam issues and those questions, and without that, you don't have a valid exam. So we will continue to remind people how important it is to participate. Industry associations, the California Funeral Directors Association, Cemetery and Mortuary Association of California, and the Association of California Cremationists have been very helpful to us when we send our letters to them and say, please get this out to your membership. So we get a few more, but it's been a real struggle for this last year to get this examination finished, and I just can't stress how important that is to have our participation from the industry. So
yeah, we've had to cancel several workshops because we didn't have participants, or we didn't have enough participants. So it really has been difficult getting this exam completed. So because as I mentioned at the beginning, this is continuous. We will immediately be jumping into the cemetery manager exam once the crematory manager is completed. We will also be required to conduct an occupational analysis for this exam, and I will be sending out a letter to all licensed cemetery managers in early June to begin recruiting for the occupational analysis. We will have a couple of workshops for that, and so that letter will be putting out the workshop dates that we have coming up and trying to get some people to commit to those. And then later in the year, probably about November, I will be sending out a second letter that will be talking about workshop dates for when we actually get into the exam development portion of that. So if you know of anybody that would be willing, please, by all means, send them our way. Anybody have any questions about exam development?
I know somebody who's interested in becoming a cemetery manager, and she apparently hasn't had much luck finding information about it. Do you have some here, and is there a training for it?
We have our licensing information is available on our website,
Okay.
And so that goes over what the requirements are, and it has the application.
Okay.
We do not have a training program. We do have a handbook that kind of goes over the areas that you should be familiar with, and we have our laws and regulations available on our website.
Okay.
And all of our exams are based upon the laws and regulations of California.
Okay. Very good, thanks. Pass it on.
You can also, they can call our licensing analyst.
Okay.
And they can provide information as well.
Okay. Great, thanks.
No problem. Any other questions? So next, I'd like to go into our legislation. This past year, we had 4 pieces of legislation that were implemented. 4 of those are going to be covered under other agenda items, so I'd just like to quickly touch on 2 sections of legislation that were implemented. One does not directly impact the Bureau, however, it does impact potential licensees. So we always like to provide information so that our industry is aware of things that are coming out or that have been chaptered. This is Assembly Bill 356 by Assemblymember Bigelow. And this bill authorizes human remains to be transported from California to an adjacent state for disposition in that state without a death certificate or a permit for disposition if the remains are found within 50 miles of the California border and a licensed funeral establishment in the adjacent state is within 30 miles of the county border in which the decedent died, and the remains are released to that funeral establishment. So this amends Health and Safety Code Section 103050. And it just expands the distance a little bit. I believe it was previously within 20 miles, so it's extended it out to 30 miles instead. And the other bill is Senate Bill 547 by Senator Hill. And this had a lot of different sections that it affected and implemented. As it relates to the Bureau, this bill requires any person employed by or an agent of a licensed funeral establishment who consults with family or representatives of a family of a deceased person for the purpose of arranging certain services to receive documented training as specified at least once every 3 years. So this amends Business and Professions Code 7635. Previously, the arrangement counselors, as they're commonly referred to, were required to receive this training once, and it was required to be documented and your documentation made available to a field representative if required during an inspection. This now changes that to be required once every 3 years. Any questions on those 2 bills? For the Bureau, neither of those bills requires us to implement any new or amend any current regulations. The other pieces that were implemented do require us to do that, so we're going to be talking about them a little bit more in just a moment. We do have current legislation that the Bureau is monitoring, so I'm going to go over what we're kind of following and what things those would affect. The current legislation, Assembly Bill 1236, this bill would replace the term birth names with the term surnames before first marriage. So this will affect death certificates, and it will amend Health and Safety Code Sections 102230, 102231, and 102875. The next one is Assembly Bill 2138. This bill is actually quite lengthy, and it affects a lot of different areas for boards and bureaus within DCA. I'm not going to go over the entire bill. I'm going to only go over the portions that may directly impact the Bureau and our processes and procedures. This bill is dealing with, the title of it is Licensing Boards, Denial of Application, Revocation or Suspension of Licensure Due to Criminal Conviction. So as it would affect us, this would authorize the Bureau to deny, revoke, or suspend a license on the grounds that the applicant or licensee has been convicted of a crime, only if the applicant or licensee is presently incarcerated or if the conviction occurred within the preceding 5 years, and would require the crime to be directly or adversely related to the qualifications, functions, or duties of the profession. It would also prohibit us from denying a person a license based on the conviction of a crime or on the basis of acts underlying a conviction for the crime, if the conviction has been dismissed or expunged, if the person has made a showing of rehabilitation, if the person has been granted clemency or a pardon, or if an arrest resulted in a disposition other than a conviction. It would require the Bureau to develop criteria for determining whether a crime is directly or adversely related to the qualifications, functions, or duties of the profession. It would require the Bureau to follow certain procedures when requesting or acting on an applicant's or licensee's criminal history information. It would prohibit the Bureau from denying a license based solely on an applicant's failure to disclose a fact that would not have been cause for denial of the license if the fact had been disclosed. And it would require the Bureau to annually submit a report to the legislature and post on our website information containing de-identified information regarding the actions taken based on an applicant or licensee's criminal history information. So this will amend Business and Professions Code sections 7.5, 480, 481, 482, 488, 490, 492, 493, and it will add a new section, 481.5, and repeal another 490.5. So basically this would directly impact the Bureau and how we review an applicant that has a criminal history. So there would definitely be some new processes that we would have to look at if that was to be implemented. Our next is Assembly Bill 2367. This bill would require the preparation of a new one-page certificate of death if a person is able to assert that the facts are not correctly stated on the certificate and the incorrect information does not change a finding, conclusion, or determination. This will amend Health and Safety Code sections 102140, 103245, and 103250. So currently, I'm sure most of you know, if you amend a death certificate, the original certificate remains and then a second page is added. So what this will do is it will replace that. The original certificate will still remain on file with the Office of Vital Records. However, it will no longer be disclosable to the public, and the new certificate will be available as a one-page document to the public to request. Any questions on those that I covered before I move on? There's a lot. Yeah.
Is the new rules with respect to licensure, are those retroactive or is it prospective?
For which one?
The one
The
with all the
conviction?
effective, yeah.
It would be going forward, it would not be retroactive. So whenever if it passed this year, it would be effective January 1st. So then at that point, we would have to evaluate how we are reviewing if we receive any conviction information.
Okay, so people who have had their license revoked or denied for whatever reason
Yes.
in the past,
Mhm.
pursuant to one of these things which now changed, they have to come back and apply again.
Yeah, so if somebody had previously been denied a license, they can at any time still apply. They have to wait 1 year and then they are eligible to apply again. So if this passed and then somebody previously denied came back and applied, then at that time these requirements would apply to their application.
And just to follow up, if we deny an application, they have the right to appeal it and go before an administrative law judge and argue their point, and a judge will issue a decision. Same with formal discipline. If somebody's license has been revoked, they have to wait 1 year and then they can petition the Bureau for reinstatement of it or apply for another license. So at that point, when those come in, if we would be looking at it as a new application and taking into consideration the laws at that time.
Okay.
No, these are currently going through and they may not even, this could change. You know, they could be amended, things could be added or removed. So this is just as of this week, how they're currently drafted. The next is Assembly Bill 2708. This would require a person engaged in a trade or business or a supervised financial organization to provide a translation of a contract or agreement to a consumer who primarily speaks one of a specified foreign language if the transaction is negotiated in English by a minor on behalf of the consumer. And I believe there's about 6 different languages that they have specifically identified in this bill that this would impact. That will amend Civil Code sections 1632 and 1632.5. Next is Assembly Bill 2750. This will expand the definition of authorized person for the purposes of furnishing a certified copy of a death record to include, among others, an appointed conservator of a person or estate. So this will amend Health and Safety Code section 103526. We have another bill that may affect criminal history information, and it is Senate Bill 1298. So a little background, existing law requires the Department of Justice to maintain state summary of criminal history information and requires the Attorney General to furnish that information to specified entities or individuals, including an authorized entity for employment, licensing, or certification. So when applicants submit their fingerprints, then we receive information from the Department of Justice and sometimes the FBI if they have a conviction, and that information is submitted to us. So this would change that process, and this bill would prohibit the Department of Justice from releasing the record of convictions that were dismissed pursuant to specified divisions. It would also require the Department of Justice to furnish a copy of the criminal offender record information, what we call CORI, to the subject of the request, and require the department to allow the subject a reasonable opportunity of not less than 5 days to challenge the accuracy or completeness of any matter contained in the CORI prior to furnishing the report to a third party. This will amend it'll amend Penal Code section 11105. So how this will impact us is we will have a delay before we receive any fingerprint information. This will occur on the front end. So if an applicant has a criminal conviction, then what will happen is the Department of Justice will be required to send this information to them and allow them an opportunity to review it and challenge the accuracy. That, if there's any updates to that, will have to be completed before that report will be provided to us. So there will be a delay in us receiving fingerprint information, which means there will be a delay in approving and issuing licenses for applicants. And the last one is Senate Bill 1303. This has a delayed implementation if it's passed. It would become effective January 1st of 2020. And this bill would, for counties with a population of 500,000 or greater, require that the office of the coroner or the sheriff's coroner office be replaced with an office of the medical examiner to exercise the powers and perform the duties of the coroner without a public vote or election. It's going to amend Government Code sections 24000, 24009, and 24010. So we are following quite a bit of items. Only a couple will directly impact the Bureau, but all of these will impact the industry in some way or another. Any questions on any of those other bills? Okay. So that was all that I had for item 3. Lisa, you had?
I'm going to talk for just a minute. As I said earlier, Sandra Patterson, she goes by Sandy, is our field operations supervisor. Normally I would have her here, but she is meeting with field staff. So to give you a little bit of background of what she does, we have 9 field representatives that are located throughout the state of California, and they are the folks who go out and conduct inspections and investigations of licensed funeral establishments, cemeteries, and crematories and cremated remains disposers. We have had 2 vacancies due to retirements, and we just recently hired 2. When I say just recently, I mean they started on Monday with us. So we have had 2 vacancies. They're both in Southern California, and the first one is Lynn Eilis. She is a 2011 graduate of Cypress College, the Mortuary Science program. She is a licensed funeral director, a licensed embalmer, and has a crematory operator training. Neil St. Pierre is also a 2011 graduate of Cypress College, the Mortuary Science program, and he holds a funeral director and embalmer license. So both of them will be in Southern California. They will have some extensive training before they begin working independently. They will begin with inspections, and once they are fully trained in that, they will begin to conduct investigations. They all have assigned areas and assigned counties where they work. We have somebody with the Chico office all the way down to a Riverside office, and they all have, like I said, they have assigned counties that they go to for inspections and investigations. So they are here probably a bit overwhelmed at this point with all the training they've had since Monday, and there is a field staff meeting today. We try very hard to coordinate dates so that everybody can be where they need to be. Sometimes it's difficult to coordinate a room, webcast, your schedules, our field staff, and new staff. So that's why today's meeting just happened to fall when it did. But they will be fully trained. We look forward to having them. If you have firms in Southern California, you may have an opportunity to meet them at some point, obviously, but this gives us a full staff with our field unit, and we're excited. I think at this point, there's just 1 vacancy in the Bureau, though we expect another retirement mid-July. It is not me. One of our analysts will be leaving, so it seems probably in the last 18 months we've had 5 or 6 people move on due to retirement. So, and it can be quite a lengthy process to recruit and fill our positions when you're dealing with state government policies and procedures. So we are thrilled when we get to the point where we have a full staff, and then we tell people you can't leave no more. So anyway, we're very happy to have Lynn and Neil with us. So that's agenda item number 3. Are there any questions from the committee members? Any comments from public? Yes.
One other piece of legislation that's right now it looks stalled was about the cremated remains disposer not having an exam and licensing and is that still going? Is that going to go through or not?
I apologize. I don't off the top of my head recall the bill number that was. We were tracking that last year. It didn't pass last year. It was turned into a 2-year bill, and I believe that it died. So it is no longer being considered at this point in time.
So
It may be introduced in the future, but at this time there won't be any changes to the cremated remains disposer registration.
Right.
So they will still be required to register if they do 10 or more scatterings.
Right. Well, I just looked them up, and in our county, Santa Clara, there seems to be none who are eligible. They're all, off the map or not having paid. I just noticed that they're running. There's fewer out there now.
If I may, anybody who has any other type of license qualifies as a cremated remains disposer. So every funeral director, cemetery manager, they are all licensed to perform that without having a specific cremated remains disposer license.
Thank you, Nicholas, for providing that clarification. Anything else on agenda item number 3? Okay. So let's move on to number 4. We just get that order if we need to. So as Cheryl previously mentioned, Carolina Salmons is our legislative analyst, and she'll be reporting on legislation and rulemaking activities at our next meeting. So she's doing a great job in her duties, and she's still learning some of the activities associated with that position. So as the prior legislative analyst, Cheryl will lead the discussion on this agenda item as well.
Hopefully nobody's tired of hearing me talk yet. So, for our rulemaking file, we do have some handouts. We have Assembly Bill 1381, which is our chapter of legislation. It is double-sided. And the associated draft proposed language is also double-sided, and it starts with section 1225. So briefly, Assembly Bill 1381 authorizes a funeral establishment instead of a funeral director to submit an application to the Bureau if it wishes to have an apprentice embalmer at the establishment. Additionally, this bill authorizes the funeral establishment to have a trade embalmer hired by the establishment on a case-by-case basis for the purposes of satisfying the apprentice embalmer application requirement. So for an establishment to have an apprentice embalmer, our previous process was that they had to embalm a minimum of 50 cases per year, and they had to have a full-time supervising embalmer with at least 2 years of experience that was on staff. So what this bill will do is allow the funeral establishment to designate a trade embalmer to supervise an apprentice embalmer in lieu of a full-time embalmer being on staff. This does require us to have some regulation amendments, and so this language is our amendments to meet this bill's. You will notice that for California Code of Regulations section 1225, we pretty much gutted it, and then we are putting in a whole new section. The reason for this is there used to be a government code section. It was 15376, which required us to have specific timeframes which our licensing applications were processed within. That statute has been repealed. It was actually repealed quite some time ago. And as we are going through and cleaning up our regulations, we're cleaning up and removing that from our regulations. So this time frame no longer applied, and to be honest, we are really good at being quick about processing applications. If a completed application is received with all the documents included, we usually will have that processed within a couple of weeks or so. So we were already more than meeting these timeframes just on our own without this in place. The changes that will implement 1381, we have put into 1225 that the licensed funeral establishment will need to request permission from the Bureau to train an apprentice embalmer. That process already exists. We have a form on our website that establishments submit to us to request permission and be approved. This just puts that form into regulation. The next section, subsection B, says that you may employ a full-time embalmer or a trade embalmer as defined in, let's see, it is, I apologize, Business and Professions Code 7670. It defines what a trade embalmer is in subsection D. So you may use either to meet the requirements for having an apprentice embalmer. And then subsection C says that the apprentice embalmer shall be supervised by the same supervising embalmer, regardless if it is a full-time or a trade embalmer, unless you submit a report of apprenticeship that requests to change the supervising embalmer. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns about 1225 and the amendments that we're making on that? No? Okay.
What we're trying to do, this is in order to draft or promulgate regulations, we have to go through a process that's dictated by the government code and the Office of Administrative Law in order to make changes to the regulations. So we're doing this, we're kind of vetting this language now. There will be a formal document when we get ready to file our notice that says this is a language we're moving forward with. There will be a public hearing in which we will take public comments, and when we get public comments, we have to respond to each and every one of those. So we're always willing to share the information first. The more we can work out up front before we get to that hearing, the faster the process goes, and any issues that we know of, we can address on this side of it rather than on the back side of it. So now would be the time to bring up any comments or questions on these two pieces of our draft language before we move forward, knowing that there will still be a public hearing where you can express your comments during that time. But I just want to let them know how the process works.
The next, on the other side, the next section that we are amending with this is section 1230. This section, we're changing the title to reflect what this section actually does. It was about approval to share an apprentice embalmer between establishments that are under common ownership. So we changed the title to reflect that. And we've made some minor changes in subsection A3. This mirrors other amendments we've done in prior rulemaking files where we are clarifying that the licensed funeral establishments, in this case, are to be located within a 1-hour driving distance, not to exceed 60 miles from your designated main office. So this is where you have more than one business that is under common ownership. If you have shared apprentice embalmers, one of those needs to be designated as your main office, and then the other can be up to 60 miles away. And then we are cleaning up in subsection B the outdated form reference to what the new revised form is for sharing an apprentice embalmer. Any questions, comments about that section? Yes?
Any sense of timing as to when the regulation may be published?
This will not be available for a little bit. As Lisa mentioned, we do have a review process. What we are doing is bringing this language forward here first before we start to go through the review process. So once we have finished this here, our next step is to take this proposed language along with the other documents that are the rulemaking file. They include a notice that goes out to anybody that's interested, and an initial statement of reasons which explains why we are making these changes. Those documents will be prepared and sent forward to our legal counsel for review, and then they will go to the director's office to be reviewed, and then they go to the agency, and then once the agency has signed off and approved them, we will submit them to the Office of Administrative Law. They will be noticed. They send out notices every Friday, and once that is noticed on Friday, that begins the 45-day public comment period. We have 45 days where public and industry or anybody, consumer groups, can submit comments about the proposed changes. And at the end of that, we will have a public hearing where we will also take written comments. After all of that is done, then we have additional documents we prepare, a final statement of reason, which if we've received no public comment is really easy to get done and out the door again. If we do receive public comment, we have to address them in that final statement of reason. Once that's done, it goes to the Office of Administrative Law, and their legal office will review it. Once it is approved by them, any new changes are implemented quarterly, so it will depend upon when it's approved. That next quarter is when it will become effective. We do send out information on our interested parties list to anybody that's on that list, so they will actually receive a copy of our noticed regulations, and we do that either by mail or email, the person's choice how they want to receive that information. And then it is also available on the website. Our website has all of our regulatory packages that are going through, and we might even put it out on our email list,
We could.
the listserv, because we haven't had any regulations go through in a little while, so this would be something new, and I know there's been a lot of interest in these changes for the trade embalmers, so it will be a little bit, unfortunately. I know that's probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but we are working on it. We do try to move these through as quickly as possible.
So let me just follow up on that. There is a process, as Cheryl explained, that's in place. Some of that's out of our control, but if there's no comments or recommended changes on these proposals, we're ready to take off with those and get them going through the process probably next week. So then it'll just be up to others that are involved in that process and how fast they move. But we're ready. The next item we'll talk about the next set of regulations we need to prepare. We want to get these out of the way so we can start on those. So
These two pieces of legislation are easy regulations. So we're trying to get these done before we move into the heavy stuff. The next handout is Senate Bill 800. And then we have our language, which starts at section 2317.2. Senate Bill 800, as it relates to the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau, authorizes licensed crematories within a close geographical proximity to request authorization to share a licensed crematory manager to manage, supervise, and direct the business of the profession for more than one facility. So this allows a crematory manager to be shared at more than one location if they are under common ownership. For this, we are amending California Code of Regulations section 2317.2. In subsection B, we are just designating that to request this change, there is a filing fee of $50. And then we are adding a new section, 2326.6, is approval to share a crematory manager. And this section mirrors section 2326.5, which is approval to share a cemetery manager. So the requirements are very similar. They have to be under common ownership. You have to have one designated as the main office. And you have to be within 60 miles of the main office to share a crematory manager. And then it designates the form that you have to complete and submit to us to request this. And it lets you know that an inspection may be scheduled and completed to ensure that the conditions set in this section are satisfied. Any questions, comments about either of these sections? Yes.
Does the Bureau have the authority when they're creating these regulations to add to them to fix problems, real or perceived, that are brought up by the public or by people in the industry? Or is this something that is done at a much higher level and you're just guiding it through the process?
It depends. We cannot, if we have statutory authority, we cannot create a regulation without statutory authority to do so. We are implementing a statute that has given us authority to do something. So if there is a statute that allows us to do whatever it is, then yes, if we don't have something in place already, it is something that we could take into consideration to review and determine, is it necessary to implement a regulation in order to carry out this statutory requirement?
The reason I'm asking is, right now, as you said, you're mirroring the cemetery manager thing for distance and such. There are cemeteries that have a cemetery manager who has never set foot on that cemetery's grounds. And we don't talk about it, but it happens in real life. Nobody's really in charge. And I'm just wondering, is that something that has to change at the legislative level? Or can the Bureau step in and say, we're adding an extra regulation saying you have to visit that cemetery at least once a year, or whatever amount of time is reasonable to ensure that that cemetery is being operated according to the law? So I don't know what the Bureau can and can't do in that situation.
That's the same thing for funeral establishments as well.
Yeah.
You just pay somebody to
Right.
hang their license on the wall, and they've never stepped foot in the establishment.
It is something that we can look at. I believe that even on the funeral side and cemetery managers and crematory managers, the regulation says direct supervision and what that's supposed to mean. So whether the Bureau looks at its procedures and say, okay, when we go do an inspection, if that's something we ask, when are they here, what are they doing? If there's enough evidence that we have that allows us to do something with that. I don't know. We would probably talk to legal and look at the language that's currently in the regulation and say, look, if we, part of us is when we bring an action or something, the burden is on us, whether it's a citation or formal disciplinary action that says this person is not there. They're not there on a full-time basis, and then, you know, the law doesn't say full-time, it says direct supervision, and what does that mean? And how do we, what's our evidence to show that they're not there? So it can get tricky, but it's something that we can certainly take a look at.
Because I'm thinking changing what's being done on the cemetery side is different than the opportunity you have here now that you're introducing something new about sharing a crematory manager. You know, that might be a place to say, let's put that in, and then later on say, let's change cemetery to match that, the way you're using cemetery now.
The other issue that we're cautious of, sometimes we'll do, like, you might look at these pieces of legislation and say, you know, could we just do one rulemaking file? And sometimes when you get a big, what we call rulemaking file, or it's the regulation package going forward. If it's extremely complex or you're mixing issues in there, yeah, it's subject to either get, I don't want to say kicked back, or it can be much more difficult to go through. So we break up things independently when we can, so that if there's no issues there, those can go through and get on the books, and then we can go, you know, with the next one. So I agree that it's a problem. I would also say, or consider that within your own industry, if you have owners that are doing that, or just paying somebody, or just say, hang your license on the wall, I'll pay you $1,500 a month. You know, if there's not somebody willing to do that, then there's no place for that funeral director to go. So part of it, I think the problem's kind of twofold. If, yeah, I'm just paying them to hang their license because I need somebody, but they're not really here. You know, those managers are still subject to citation or formal disciplinary action for everything that goes on in that firm, whether they're there or not. So they're, you know, and the owner is as well. So by an owner putting somebody in place who is either not there or not overseeing it or managing like they should, they're both subjecting their licenses to some sort of action, up to and including revocation if those violations are egregious enough, or they are repeat violations all the time. So I agree, I've heard that from owners, and you know, so-and-so's just letting them hang their license. It's like, stop doing that. So, you know, if there's, you know, even people that have had disciplinary action, and I've had people come and say, well, why are they still practicing? You know, their license has been revoked, but there's nothing that says they can't go sweep floors or still work in a funeral establishment or a cemetery. And if somebody is willing to employ them, you know, that presents a problem too within your own industry. If you know somebody's had a license revoked for whatever reason, you may want to consider, do I want to employ that person or not? It's a very individual choice, but if there's no demand for it, then your supply is going to go away.
Is there a channel for industry complaint when they know of other?
Absolutely. We are, you know, people can complain online. People can submit a written complaint. It doesn't have to be on the complaint form itself, and trust me, they do. This industry is very good. They police themselves quite a bit, and they do not hesitate to say, hey, this is going on next door in my area. So yes, absolutely. We look at every complaint that we receive. Even if it's an anonymous complaint, if we can independently verify that information, if somebody says, hey, there's an unlicensed person working over here, and we can go do an inspection and identify that person, then we can remain anonymous. Obviously, it gets difficult if somebody says, I want to remain anonymous, or I don't want to give you my name, but, you know, I had the service at this place and I'm not happy and I'd like my money back. Well, that's impossible to mediate. But if we can independently verify the information, we will move forward with a complaint and or an investigation if that's what it takes. So yes, absolutely.
Okay, and that's not on the website, or where?
The website, yes, there's an online complaint form where people can go on and complain. Sometimes we get a call, or sometimes they'll just simply write a letter. It doesn't matter if it's on the complaint form or on a written letter. We do ask for it in writing. There are times that things are time sensitive, where we'll go ahead and take the action and then ask them to put their complaint in writing so that we have it. Sometimes there's documents or contracts or other things that they need to submit to support their complaint, so we will ask for those. But there is definitely a mechanism for the public and industry to file complaints. Okay.
It's very clear on the website. We can't get to our forms that we need, because there's the complaint form.
Hey, Lisa, how does this work, this licensing or not? If you have 20% of the cemeteries are regulated, and supposedly those guys are licensed who work there. But there's 80% out there, so a cemetery licensee could work at an unlicensed cemetery, and you'd never know it, and you don't care. And it could be 75 miles away. You know, does that happen?
I don't know, I think it can happen. I'm not personally aware of a situation where it is happening, where it could happen.
Well, I can think of a way that it could happen, but because there's so many out there, well, I won't go into details, but it's not against the law then?
No.
Okay.
So for our proposed regulations, since we have no comment, we will. Yes?
How in the world are you going to regulate 1 hour driving distance, depending on traffic patterns, and have it replace the 60 miles? It used to be the 60 miles, you would look at it like on MapQuest or something to drive it, and then it became, then the word radius sort of messed that up, but I have no idea how you'd ever figure out 1 hour driving distance on the approval to share apprentices.
So we map it and see how far, what is the distance. We understand in LA, yes, traffic is awful. You might not truly meet the 1 hour, but if the distance is close enough, we can't approve or disapprove based upon, well, you're in LA, you might hit traffic, so I'm not sure. We have to go off of, okay, it says that it's within 40 miles. We couldn't say, no, we're not going to approve that. I mean, traffic can happen anywhere. There could be an accident.
Well,
those things are outside our control.
But this is currently in law already, right?
The 60, it's the other one.
I know, but it's currently
Yes.
in one of the other, so this mimics.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So it's already in law, and we are just changing radius to be more clear that it's within 60 miles.
Because it's for cemetery managers, it currently says that.
Yes, for cemetery managers, we did change that with our limited liability company rulemaking file. So now as other code sections come up that we're amending, we're mirroring that so that our regulatory language is consistent throughout the different sections.
Close geographic proximity and 1 hour driving doesn't necessarily tie.
They really don't correlate.
I just think it's a whole can of worms to say 1 hour rather than just saying driving miles. You know,
Okay.
just a comment.
Okay.
Okay, no, let's, so we'll take a look at it. So you're thinking instead of saying,
Radius, I take radius out to go driving miles, you know, because that's the way you used to do it. Now-
exactly.
And it worked.
But
Originally,
radius,
60 miles,
we were questioned on it several times because it said radius, and
Yes.
the true definition of radius, so then we started doing like as a crow flies. So that's what we had, pretty much what we have to use. So this was just gonna mimic what's currently in for cemetery managers, but if it makes sense to kind of change that, it's certainly something we'll take a look at. Is there anything else on either of these that might, that you might question, other than that? And you don't, if you know, you don't have to necessarily tell me right this moment. If you happen to go back and think of something, if you just shoot us an email or let us know, we're happy to take a look at it. Any other comments or questions from either the public or the committee members? Okay, I am going to take items 5 and 6 out of order. We're gonna jump to 6 and then we'll come back to 5. Because I have Julia Bishop here, she's the Assistant Deputy Director for the Department's Division of Legislative and Regulatory Review. I've asked Julia to provide an overview of the sunset review process The Bureau will start writing its report probably shortly after this meeting, and you will hear us talk about sunset review and the process between now and the end of the year and even into the beginning of 2019. And I think it's important that you understand what it is and what it means. So, Julia, please welcome Julia. She'll give you an overview of that process, and then we can answer any questions you might have.
Sorry. That's better.
Hi, my name is Julia Bishop. As Lisa said, I'm the assistant deputy. I've been with the department for almost 6 years, so been through a number of sunsets. All of our different 38 licensing programs under the department go through the sunset process. This bureau does not have, many of our licensing boards have sunset dates in their statutes, so they're required to go through the process in order to prove to the legislature they should continue to exist. The bureau is not that way. There is no sunset date. So the purpose of this is really for the legislature to review the operations of the Bureau, provide any sort of feedback, make any recommendations about how to improve operations or things like that. The process is basically a 2-year process. So as Lisa said, this year they're going to be starting to work on their report. This is a report template that's provided to the Bureau from the legislature. It requires them to talk about everything from what regulations have changed since they last went through sunset to what are their licensing statistics, their enforcement statistics, and to talk about any ongoing policy issues that may be out there. I know the Bureau recently turned in a report to the legislature, so that would probably be an attachment on trust funds, if I'm getting that correct.
Yes.
So that would probably be something that would be included with the report. And the purpose of this report is to give the legislature as much information as possible about the current operations of the Bureau, where they may be doing really well, where they maybe could use some tools to improve their processes or things like that. The past 2 years, this report has been due to the legislature in December, on December 1st. And my office will be coordinating very closely with the Bureau and Lisa and her staff on refining the report and getting it ready for publication. After they turn it into the legislature, they'll publish it on their website, so it'll become a public document. And this essentially is sort of like the culmination of, we haven't been through this for 4 years, here's everything that has happened over the last 4 years. From that point going into 2019, the legislature will hold sunset hearings. Legislative staff will draft something that's called a background paper that they'll publish on their website. It's sort of a mini compilation of the information that the Bureau provided in their report. You know, here's what they do, here's who they are, that kind of information. And then the legislature will typically identify a number of issues that they think they would like to hear from the Bureau on, or that they think potentially need to be addressed. So an example is when the Bureau went through sunset 4 years ago, one of the things that came out of that sunset was that there was a recommendation to combine the practice acts and to combine the funds. And so that came out of that process. So that's kind of like an example of the kinds of things that they're looking at. Lisa will go up and testify before the joint committees, the business and professions committees of both houses, which is her favorite part of this job.
Really not.
Our director will join her up there, so she doesn't have to be completely solo, but she's obviously the expert. The legislature will let her know ahead of time sort of what issues they would like her to talk about. She'll provide any testimony and then field any questions from the legislators themselves. From there, the legislature will introduce a bill. As I said, they don't have a statutory sunset date, but the legislature has typically put in language something like, the Bureau shall be reviewed again in 4 years. And typically this Bureau it's every 4 years. Sometimes if programs have problems, it'll be a little bit shorter, but this Bureau is always squeaky clean, so nobody ever has any issues. So they'll likely be extended 4 years until their next review. And then if there's any policy issues that come up as part of the sunset review process, those are sometimes also put into the bill in addition to sort of that extension of their review. After that, the bill basically goes through the regular legislative process. We'll coordinate with the Bureau as needed if there are policy issues that come up. And then it'll go to the governor for signature toward the end of the year. And then they'll finally be able to say, all right, 4 more years, so we have to deal with this whole process again. But so that's sort of the general high-level version of the process. I don't know if anybody has any questions about how that works or what to expect.
know, wow. Yeah.
4 more years.
4 more years. And what I keep saying last year, I'm thinking we just did it last year, and it's actually been through 2014. I will tell you some of the difficulty with the 2014 one is the last time we were reviewed was like 2002. And since that time, I'm Bureau Chief number 5. So to try to take that information from 2002 to 2012, 10 years worth, when I'm the 5th Bureau Chief, was challenging to say the least. There's a lot of statistical information about our licensing program, our enforcement statistics, performance measures, how long it takes us to do things. All of those things are looked at. So I'm hoping, I'm anticipating it might be a little bit easier since I wrote the last one and I'm still here, that I can look at the 2014 and say, I know because I've been here and I know the history, this has changed or it hasn't. So I'm hoping that this is a little less stressful. My family swore that I grew horns during the time in 2014. So I'm hoping that this goes a little bit, I won't say smoother, just a little bit easier to manage because this is on top of everything else we're already doing. So it is a significant workload, especially in Cheryl's unit and Sandy's unit, because they'll compile all the statistics. They'll take care of the budget information and most of the narrative. So I wanted you to understand what that meant when you hear sunset review, or what the process means and what it entails, because you'll hear it quite a bit between now and early 2019. So if nobody has any questions for Julie, you are welcome to stay till the end of our meeting, or I'm sure you have other things to do.
We actually have a sunset training this afternoon.
So I'll go from this meeting to the one at 1:30 for sunset training. So it kind of ties right into that. So anyway, thank you very much. I appreciate you being here. Okay, so no comments or questions on that. If not, we'll jump back to agenda item number 5. And there were 2 pieces of legislation that were signed by the governor last year that require us to do regulations. And these are pretty in-depth regulations. That's why earlier we started with the 2 easier ones to get those moving. And I'll just kind of touch on what the bills do. So Assembly Bill 926 allows a cemetery, its trustees, or its corporate trustee to apply to the Bureau on or after January 1 of 2020 to convert its endowment care fund from a net distribution method to a unitrust distribution method. So currently, the money a cemetery can use for cemetery maintenance is limited to income only, which is interest and dividends. This bill would allow a cemetery to use a unitrust model upon approval of the Bureau to include interest, dividends, and realized and unrealized capital gains in determining the income available for cemetery maintenance. The bill also requires to report on the effectiveness of this unitrust distribution method at our next 2 sunset review hearings that occur after January 1, 2018. And the last thing this bill does, it allows the Bureau to extend the due date of the endowment care fund and special care fund reports that Dave was talking about earlier, up to 9 months. Currently, licensees, if they need an extension on those reports, can request only 30 days. That was our statutory authority, was to grant 30 days. And after that, if they didn't come in within that 30 days, they're late, and then they're subject to a citation and a fine. So this makes sense to give them more time if they need it, and we can do up to 9 months. It doesn't mean that everybody would just be granted 9 months off from the start. I understand that there are some investments where licensees or trustees don't typically get some of that information until after the due date of the report. So this helps those folks to be able to get that information and file the report without it being late. I'll take questions on this one first before I go into the next one. I may need Dave's expertise as my supervising auditor. Again, this takes effect on January 1 of 2020. So that gives us time to write the regulations and do what we have to do to prepare for that and train our staff and get up to speed. So committee members, any questions on that at all? What that means?
Maybe Dave can answer. Who's likely to opt for a unit trust? What type of cemetery is likely to opt? One that's in financial trouble, one that's just wants to put as much as possible into the general fund?
So I don't know what what cemeteries would be more likely to choose this model. It would depend on the trustee and kind of how they're managing the trust. So currently, the law says that they can use kind of realized income from investments, interest and dividends and rental income for cemetery maintenance. But it has to be real, interest, kind of like if you had $100 in your checking account and were earning, let's say 1%, right, on your funds. Under the current law, you could spend, I'm sorry, I'll speak up a little bit, I talk low. Somebody back here is so you could spend $1, right? Under the current model, the realized income that you would get from your checking account would be $1 per year, and you could spend that $1 on cemetery maintenance. Under the new model, you could spend up to $4 of that 100, even though it wasn't realized income, meaning from interest and dividends and rental income. You may have unrealized gains or other sources that you can expend from, so you could spend up to $4 on cemetery maintenance out of your $100 that you have in your account. So there could be an incentive for most cemeteries to convert to this model, because for every dollar that they have available through the endowment care income to spend on cemetery maintenance, it offsets by $1 their corporate costs for cemetery maintenance. So there's an incentive, there is a built-in incentive to convert to the unit trust model. The argument for the unit trust model is that if you're managing an investment portfolio for current income, your investments may not be the best for long-term growth of the fund. So if you're not dependent on current income but are able to invest in ways that increase the overall value of the fund, then it could result in a better outcome in the long run for the cemetery. There are probably mixed results on that. It depends on the trustee. It depends on the investments portfolio. It depends on a heck of a lot of things. So some of the things that we'll be looking at as we do the rulemaking file and write the regulations for this is kind of taking into consideration what we need to do as the Bureau in trying to protect consumers' long-term interests in cemetery maintenance, to making sure that these cemeteries are maintained, to looking at what we need to do to ensure that we're doing our due diligence in approving the unit trust model.
So if I understand it, I'm not an accountant and I'm not an investor. I'm a caretaker at a graveyard. Okay, so my understanding, what I just heard you say is, right now I get my $1 because that's the interest I earned. And I can use that for whatever I want for cemetery care maintenance embellishment. If I opt for a unit trust, there's $4, which means that I can get that $4, and instead of investing in things that I'm restricted to invest in, like endowment care, I have to have very, very safe investments. Now I can get those $4, put it in the general fund, and I can invest that in, Tom Zaney Investment Company or whatever it is, because if I lose that, it's not affecting the endowment care. So that's like one of the incentives, is that what I'm getting?
Well, so you can use the $4 for cemetery maintenance.
Right.
So under the current net distribution model, they call it, you can use the $1, right? That's the realized income. That's real money. That's just like you went down to the bank and you withdrew $1. Under the unit trust model, you'd have up to $4 that you could take and spend on cemetery maintenance. So you wouldn't be taking that $4 and investing it, right? The requirement doesn't change, that it has to be expended on cemetery maintenance. So the investment portfolio, the $100, if under the current model, if you're investing that $100 for a real return, right, you may have a different approach in investment to get that $1 than if you can invest in a way that you're not investing for current income. You're not trying to generate income. You're not, for example, if you have investments that are in a gain scenario, where if you sell them, you will get money. You have, under the current model, you have an incentive to sell those to take the money so you can spend it on cemetery donations. Under the new model, you don't have to sell those to get the money. Right? You can spend up to $4 of that 100, right? That's available. Now the question is, over the long run, are you harming, right, the overall portfolio? Because the intent, the overall legislative intent of the endowment care is for the long run care and maintenance of the cemetery. But that falls to the probate code sections that have to do with trustee responsibilities in California. So the trustees still need to follow the prudent investor rule, and they need to follow all of the other requirements in the probate code to maximize, right, the intent of endowment care. This gives them other tools, essentially, to use to do that.
And do you think it depletes the corpus of the endowment fund faster, which means that the cemetery would permanently close because nobody can mow the lawn, because nobody can get paid a lot sooner? Do you think that is?
So that's a risk, right? It's a risk. I wouldn't say that it would. I would say that it could. It would depend on the management of the fund. I mean, there is an incentive to manage these funds for immediate income, and there's also an incentive to manage these funds for the long run care and maintenance. And sometimes those two incentives can be at cross purposes with one another. So it really is a matter of the trustee making the decisions of how to invest these funds and making the decision about what income. In other words, the new law does not require that they take $4.
Right.
They can leave income in and let that income accrue interest. So there's a lot of options in terms of what trustees could do. So really, this law will place more onus on the trustees, right, to look at how they're managing these funds to ensure that the long run growth eventually will result in a sufficient amount of income to take care of the cemetery once it's no longer a viable economic operation.
So if I can just one last thing, maybe Cheryl can answer this. So taking all that into consideration when the rulemaking process happens, have you considered that some cemeteries can be harmed by doing this and setting up rules so that each cemetery is evaluated individually before permission is given, or are you looking at this like it's a gimme, everybody gets it just for asking?
No, the part of the requirements in the statute is that, and that's why we're drafting regulations, there will be criteria that somebody has to meet and we have to look at. And it may, I think one of them just off the top of my head is looking back at like 3 prior fiscal years. They will need our approval to do that, to go to that method. And I think there's even something in there that says if we can require them to go back if they don't maintain those conditions. So the regulations will specify even further what the statute already says so that those protections are in place. Somebody can't just come ask and we say, okay, they'll be, we'll have to do our due diligence and give them permission in order to do that. So.
And then monitor over the years
Exactly.
to see how it's going. Because ultimately, if there is evidence that the Mr. and Mrs. Jones's deposits, the ones that they were required to put in when they bought the interment spaces, if we start looking at realized loss having to do with those deposits and a real loss to the overall endowment care fund, depending on the regulations in that process.
Absolutely, and furthermore, we have to monitor and report and evaluate and report on it at the next sunset review hearing. So we're going to be telling the legislature what we've done over it says the first 2 after January 1 of 2018. Well, our first one will be in March of 2019, and we won't even have regs in place yet. But so they could say, okay, and you're going to report on it at 3 meetings, so we have some history. But we'll definitely be monitoring it and have to report to the legislature. And it could be out of that process comes, okay, we're gonna amend the statute in some way if necessary. So there is a lot of conditions and criteria that have to be met first, and then subsequent monitoring after that to make sure that what you're talking about doesn't happen.
Thank you.
Good questions, thank you, Brent.
I think though, to this example, even though your answer was the $4 has to go to cemetery maintenance, what that does is it frees up $3 that otherwise would have come from the general fund, right? So that there still is that then discretion of the person who is managing that general fund to have use of those $3 that were otherwise unavailable to them. So.
And I know from cemeteries I've managed, smaller cemeteries, that interest that comes in doesn't come close to what it costs to run the place. So it basically ends up just getting thrown into the general fund to supplement what the cemetery has done anyway. I'm just concerned that more and more comes out of the endowment care fund, so the life of that fund is much shorter in the long run by taking more out, at the front end.
That's a real risk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is a risk. And, the consolidators, they follow the law, they're very good investors and everything else. The small mom and pops, when you gotta pay the light bill, and, this is when the temptation comes in to do things that are not so smart and kind of risky. And I think everybody who's ever been in this business knows that we regulate ourselves very well, but when somebody decides they're going to steal, and be dishonest, it's the endowment care fund they focus on because that's where the money is. And this, to me, seems like an opportunity to do that if the rules and regulations are not very, very clear about, who can and can't do this and under what circumstances.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, it sounds like it puts a lot more work in the auditor's office too.
Yeah.
I mean, is there provision for hiring more
part-timers?
auditors?
It does, sorry.
We're looking at that. There's a process that the bureaus or the state has to go through in order to do that, and that it is something that we're looking at, yes.
Good question, and I appreciate that too.
Good luck.
Okay, so I'll go on to the second piece of legislation, and then I'll let you know what our plans are from there. So Assembly Bill 967 requires the Bureau to license and regulate hydrolysis facilities, allows a crematory manager to be designated as a hydrolysis facility manager with the certification approved by the Bureau, and requires an applicant for a hydrolysis facility license to obtain and present to the Bureau any state or locally required permits for business operations, and must use a hydrolysis chamber approved by the State Department of Public Health. So this particular piece of legislation had a lot of moving parts in it, and it's quite lengthy, so I'm just really tried to narrow it down at what it requires us to do. I will tell you, since 2010, this is the 5th piece of legislation on alkaline hydrolysis that has come across the Bureau's office. The governor signed this one, so it's very detailed, although it puts some of the requirements back on the local entities to make sure that, or the applicant has to go to the local entities and get the any required permits from maybe the local water agencies and provide that as part of their application process. Department of Public Health also has to be the one to approve the chamber, so we are looking at our application process and what we need to collect from people. We are hoping, this is a big hope, but I hope at our next meeting that we're planning for November, we will have some draft language to look at for both of these pieces of legislation, and that we can begin a more in-depth discussion on them. Like I said, that's a big hope. I'm not promising, but if we get these other pieces, rulemaking files moving, I will be concentrating on sunset review, and staff can begin looking at the language. Dave is going to be working on regulations for the unit trust model, and Carolina and Cheryl and myself will be working on alkaline hydrolysis. Again, it's our intent to vet these to the associations and consumer groups as necessary before we get to our final version that we're ready to start the initial rulemaking process. So alkaline hydrolysis, that does not become effective until, I think I did this, July 1st of 2020. I don't know why I'm still writing 2010. Because I said the first piece of legislation was 2010. So this takes effect July 1 of 2020. So our regulations have to be in place by then. And for the unit trust model, they take effect January 1 of 2020. So that gives us time to write the regulations and get through the rulemaking process. But as Cheryl explained, that rulemaking process can be lengthy, so we want to start on it sooner than later. So it's my intent that once we get past the other two pieces of legislation, which we're very close to now, that we'll start writing these. So, like I said, I hope that we have at least one, if not both of those, to talk about at our next meeting in November. So, any questions on either of those? And I know we've talked significantly about unit trust. Anything on alkaline hydrolysis?
Is there going to be an exam associated with it?
Not on this particular one. What we currently have, it's similar to, I want to say similar to cremation, but as far as taking in a body and identifying it and ending up with a set of, not cremated remains, hydrolyzed remains, we are looking at using a crematory manager, being able to have some training, certification in that part of alkaline hydrolysis and be able to use that, that person. Part of what, I know I said there were 5, this is the 5th piece of legislation. Whenever we look at legislation, one of the things we're asked about or to provide is a fiscal analysis. And as Cheryl talked about exam development and an occupational analysis, in order to have a separate manager for this type of facility, you have to go through the same process of exam development, and there's 2 parts to that. And when you're looking or anticipating only a very small number of facilities to begin with and then put a manager with them, the costs were always just extremely high, because that same work has to be done whether you're licensing one person, one manager, or 2,500 managers. So this piece is, it's significantly less expensive for the Bureau to implement, because they don't need a separate, we're not creating an examination for a manager, which may be 2 or 3 or 4. So being allowed for the crematory manager to have a licensed crematory manager, have another component that shows that they know how to work with that machine and what needs to be done, should be sufficient for this part.
And would future crematory managers tests include this stuff?
Probably not. They would be licensed as a crematory manager, and then there would be additional training. I don't know how it's going to look yet until we get into it, but right now, crematory, you have a licensed crematory manager, and then crematory operators are not licensed by the Bureau, but the law requires that they have certain training before they begin doing cremations. We envision something similar to that.
I've seen the one in Minnesota. I got a tour. I know the people who run it and somebody who works there, and I would recommend anybody who's thinking about it should contact him. Bradshaw. What is it, Bradshaw?
Who?
I think it is. Is it Bradshaw?
We have it up on our website.
Yeah, in Minnesota. It's been there for 15 years.
And there's
they are
also
they are green, they are LED certified.
Right.
It's absolutely beautiful place. So it's
We,
worth a trip.
they're also using it at UCLA in their World Body Program.
Well, the animal ones, yeah. Oh.
No, it's not. No,
UCLA?
it's an actual one they use for cadavers, and I have
That's what I meant, animals.
toured that. I've watched it from start to finish several years ago. Dean Fisher is the gentleman who runs that program and is very knowledgeable in it. So I know that we will be reaching out to industry and the experts as we
I've got
develop our
photographs too if anybody wants them.
regulations. So thank you for that information. I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments on that? Okay.
When you see it in the
So that takes us to item number 7, looking at proposed meeting dates for November. I know this, trying to set this meeting was a little challenging. That's a good word. It was challenging to try to find a date that works for everybody. So I wanted us to take a look at calendars now for November. I was looking at either November 1st or the 14th or the 15th. If any of those dates do not work, please let me know and I'll cross them off and we'll start eliminating. And then we can kind of narrow it down to something that works and just set that date.
So you said 1st, 14th, or
The 1st, the 14th, or the 15th of November.
14th and 15th don't work.
They don't, okay. Would the first work? Yes. What?
Seemed easy.
Well, no, because not everybody said yes yet,
Oh,
so. Huh? Come on, cross test. So will November 1st work for everybody? Am I hearing yes? Okay, so we'll, please place that on your calendar and we'll plan for November 1st. And that way we've got it, we'll work on, I think we're far enough out that we can schedule the room and our webcasting and, I can tell people no to vacations. I know. That's okay, that's including myself too, so,
Lisa?
yes.
Would you explain webcasting? It's a long journey for us to get here. And so, can we watch at home?
Yes.
Is that what it's like?
Yes, it's like the gentleman, Rice, with our department is recording it now. Normally, as I explained earlier, we have we had some technical difficulties. So right now he's recording it and it will be posted up on YouTube. You can get it through the department's website and you can watch it. Normally what happens is it's recorded or it's webcast in real time so that if somebody wanted to watch the meeting from a computer while it's happening, they can go onto their computer and follow along. It's always, the information's always posted on our website prior to the meeting. It's usually the morning of that tells you click on here and that's how you'll get to it. So yes, and even now, this will be available. You can go back and look at other meetings if you want to. I mean, if you were so inclined to.
But you wouldn't be able to make a comment unless you
Exactly, exactly. You're observing only.
Right.
Lisa?
Yes.
I don't see it, but can there be microphones put in front of the people so that the recording can hear it, or is it sufficient?
Bryce, are you able to hear?
Yes.
And Cheryl actually uses our webcast. You know, we stopped putting a recorder here. Cheryl actually goes back to the recorded version to type up our minutes. Are you able to hear?
Yeah.
Can you all hear? I mean, has anybody
Yeah, I can't hear.
have you viewed the webcast? Are you able to like not hear?
Very little. I
Haven't seen it.
I've got my hearing aid. I'm sorry. So, but I can't. Even then, it's hard because people do mumble.
And then one other question.
Sure.
Are webcasts available at a later time? Are they recorded or is it only live?
No, it's later, so you can go back and watch any of them if you chose to.
We have all of the prior webcasts linked on our advisory committee webpage. So next to the information about the meeting, it's the far right column, it says webcast. If we webcast the meeting, then you can link to it from that webpage.
So I could watch this a week from now, or 2 weeks from
Yes.
now, or whenever.
We do go back and look at numbers to see, you know, how many people have viewed it or hit it or whatever the language they use, and it's not a large number, but it is available for people that want to go back. So, and like Cheryl said, it's on our advisory committee page. You've got the dates, you've got the agenda, you've got the minutes, and you've got the webcast. So you have access to all of the information right there.
And meeting
Is this public
materials.
time now?
Excuse me?
Is this public time now? Did you start public time?
We're just getting there.
I thought my friend here started public time.
So, as I was saying, on the advisory committee webpage, if there was any meeting materials associated or available as a handout, those are also required to be posted on our website. So if you don't see anything, that means we didn't have any meeting materials out for that meeting, but if there was, then they are listed. So all the documents that are out on the table today are available on our website right now.
Okay, we'll jump to agenda item number 8, public comments on items not on agenda. So if there is anybody in the audience who would like to make any public comments about issues that are not on our agenda, you may do so at this time. Please be aware that Government Code Sections 11125 and 11125.7 do not allow the Bureau to discuss or act on any public comments not included on the agenda, except to decide whether to place the matter on a future advisory committee agenda. So if making a public comment, please state your name and the name of the organization or association you represent, if applicable. So at this time, let's go into public comments.
My name is Jane Hillhouse, and my business is Final Footprint. I'm involved in the natural burial business and natural caskets. I supply them. It has come to my attention that there is a gentleman with a lot of money who would like to create a natural burial site in this area and in the California area. I can't be totally specific right now, but he called me from Santa Cruz, and he has collected quite a little pocket full of money, and he's planning on doing 3 of these natural burial sites. So if anybody knows of somebody who has probably a cemetery they would like to pass on and have it created into a natural burial site, that would be one way to go, and it's the easiest and quickest for the natural burial movement because they would already be certified, and they could probably take on the certification of that cemetery. At the moment, he is looking at land. We all know what looking at land is like in California. So that's my announcement. I would love somebody to pass on this information to somebody who would be interested in getting involved. They're not money losers, natural burial sites, and they are beautiful. If you look on the internet and see many of the ones done in England, you'll just be overwhelmed how gorgeous they are. And we've got to get the powers that be who made these decisions to make it easier. Because, I mean, you talk to San Mateo County and they're not going to have a green burial site here. No more burial sites on the coast. And he's right there on the coast, and that's the attitude they have. So, anybody can jump in and help, give me a call. Final Footprint.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other public comments at this time?
You had one.
Well, I had a question. I always have a question because I get, I'm Marjorie Bridges, and I get hotline calls for the Funeral Consumers Alliance of California and locally. And the guy has a lot of questions about buying a cemetery site, one of which was, if he buys that for his father, can he be assured that his father is going to be in that site forever?
Or reuse.
Or can they resell it, dig him up and resell it? So, you know, I look in the law, it looks like he can. That they could, you know, you spend $15,000 for that site, and they can, with proper procedure, declare they want the site for something else and evict him. And you straighten me out on that.
Marjorie, the Bureau thanks you for your comment, but the purpose of this sort of section of the meeting is just to kind of allow the opportunity for the public to kind of voice their concerns. I think I'll speak with Lisa, and we may want to take that under consideration and maybe add that as an agenda item at a future meeting, so you can have a sort of robust discussion on this issue. But right now, it's just the opportunity to kind of convey your thoughts. You know, any comments basically, it's kind of limited to that.
The only other thing I would add is that you can always refer somebody, if you're not sure of a question, have the person either email me, call me, have the person contact the Bureau directly. Because there are, I will just say there are laws that pertain to cemeteries that we license, and then there's other laws that pertain to public cemeteries for which we have no jurisdiction. So when in doubt, have them contact the Bureau.
Could you also put on a future agenda the discussion of renting cemetery plot or renting space, as they do in Europe? For a certain number of years, it's yours, and after that point, they remains would be dug up and placed somewhere else, and it would be rented again.
It's
To
something
make
we can
space.
consider for a future agenda
Right,
item.
right.
It will be taken under consideration.
Right.
Anything else? Okay, well, it is 11:54. We will go ahead and adjourn. And again, thank you, everybody, for your attendance and the questions and the discussion. So, have a great day. Safe travels.